Our board host today is Andy Linehan, member of the Board of Governors and Senior Environmental Planner with CH2M Hill. Andy will ask the first question of our speaker. Following Andy's question, we will open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. And as always, please line up behind the microphone even before Andy has finished his question so that we might entertain as many questions as possible. Again, please identify yourself as a member of City Club and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Pacificare, Pope & Talbot Incorporated, and as already mentioned, Zimmer Gunzel Frasca Partnership. As always, we are very thankful for their ongoing support. Also like to thank the Hilton Hotel. They have given us a gift of hot malt wine in the back of the room at the table, and feel free to enjoy that this afternoon. 1 year ago, Portland native and former Berkeley planning director Gil Kelley was named Portland's new planning director. His maneuvering around and through Berkeley's ever-shifting political shoals earned him kudos as a gifted negotiator, consensus builder, and visionary. Many describe him as unflappable, one of my favorite words, with the cool enthusiasm and warm authority of a high school coach. Gil graduated from Portland's Catlin Gable School, where his team-building abilities led him to be student body president and captain of the soccer, basketball, and track teams. He then traveled to Europe with, in his words, sketchbook in hand, and returned to receive his Bachelor of Arts in Political Economy and Environmental Design from the Evergreen State College. I believe firmly in the power of anecdote, so here's one about Gil. While at college, he was an intern planner in Bonneville, Washington, at a time when the United States Corps of Engineers was about to uproot the entire town to make way for a power plant. During this highly charged baptismal, Kelley's negotiating skills and passion for, in his own words, what lies below the surface of a community became apparent. The Corps, he recalls, wanted to simply buy out the town, but Kelley helped draft precedent-setting federal legislation that instead paid for the town's planning and relocation. When he left 4 years later, at the ripe age of 24, Gil Kelley was Bonneville's town planner. Now, as planning director for Portland, he has the challenge and opportunity to put his well-honed negotiating skills to the test. Many are looking to Gil Kelley to successfully brainstorm and implement a back-to-the-future scenario that evokes the heyday of Portland planning during Mayor Neil Goldschmidt's era of the 1970s. But the building boom of the 1990s, the budget squeezes of Measure 5, and the potential impact of Measure 7, not to mention current concerns over the availability of electric power, describe an environment markedly different from the Portland of 20 or 30 years ago. Just last year, the City Club issued a report that was highly critical of the city's planning efforts, and a mayoral advisory report railed against the city for not having a cohesive vision. Gil Kelley has likened cities to organisms, and he says that, quote, Portland has great DNA, but it needs to be lifted out of a certain repressiveness and provincialism and return to that DNA. Please join me in welcoming Gil Kelley as he takes us on a journey into the double helix of Portland's future.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I was invited to give a report after my first year on the job, and I find it curious since I've been here 10 months only that I don't have a couple more months to prepare for this. But like many aspects of my work, the stated expectations are only the opening gambit in the dialogue. So with that, I will proceed with a few comments and then try to hold time for questions and answers. The quote on the flyer that went out, I don't know how many of you received it or saw it, but I think it's sort of worth reading, and I think I've got it here. This was the introduction to Portland. Crowned by mountains swathed in green, the Pacific Northwest feels at once wild and regal. Enthroned at the center of this magnificent kingdom is Portland. If you squint your eyes, our fair city seems to rise up naturally, a lush metropolis sprung as if from the landscape itself. Well, it's a tall order to take over the helm, the planning helm in this kingdom. But in fact, viewed from afar, at least, Portland is an Eden in many ways. And we certainly have that reputation nationally, and in many ways, it's certainly true. The postcard views of Mount Hood through Washington Park confirm that we are a city nestled in nature. And in the city part, we have a very strong tradition of urbanity and city building. We do, in fact, have very good DNA, as I put it. You need only to look at the historic downtown, the terracotta district downtown, the fountains in the sidewalks, the small block pattern, the formation of neighborhoods on the Near East Side around the streetcar with tree-lined streets and neighborhood commercial districts, the co-location of schools and parks, Washington Park and later Waterfront Park being created as large civic gestures, and the magnificent design in many of the bridges and tunnels throughout the city are really there as reminders of our civic urban tradition. And we are building on that with the Pearl District. The River District in general is now receiving national attention as a very compelling new urban district. The streetcar, the first return of the streetcar in about 50 years. Now we have, I think, roughly 4 miles of what used to be a 50-mile system is coming back in. And as the tracks are laid, new buildings spring up beside it. There's great potential in the North Macadam district to be a great urban district as well, just to the south end of downtown, bracketing downtown with the River District. And the economy has greatly diversified in Portland and in the region. We are no longer strictly a resource-based economy, as we were when I left here in the mid-'70s. We are, in fact, a high-technology center, and we are increasingly recognized as such throughout the nation. When I first moved to San Francisco Bay Area in the mid to late 70s, I used to talk up Portland with friends and acquaintances, and I would sort of be that was received with sort of obliging smiles. Yeah, that's that little burg somewhere north of Sacramento, isn't it? Or better, or even still, they would say, yeah, I like Seattle too. That was really sort of how Portland figured in the national scheme of things. These days, as I was preparing to move here, I had a long list of people waiting to come visit me in Portland because Portland's image as a place of both interest, excitement, and livability is now very well known throughout the country. And San Franciscans, in fact, are looking to move here, reversing a long-term exodus from Portland south. We have the highest matriculation percentage in public schools of any major city in the country. And our urban growth policies at a regional level, though tension-filled, have actually produced astounding results. When looked at from outer space, for example, I'm sure many of you saw, 8 months or so ago, the photographs from outer space comparing the Portland region to a number of other fast-growing economic regions in the country, and how well, in fact, that we have contained a sprawl. And I think that our city buildings and carefully crafting traditions here have paid off. People here in Portland that I have met since appearing on the job all have a sense of a real enduring, not only civic mindedness, but I would describe as real hope and real belief that we collectively do make a difference in shaping our future. And that is an attitude that I cannot say exists in many metropolises around the country. And in fact, our efforts have been confirmed in many ways. Most recently, we were acknowledged by Money magazine as being among the best places to live in the country, and in fact, we're rated as the #1 place to live, large city to live in the country. And they offered that recognition in light of our balance of economic vitality, affordability, and general livability. And they attributed that, in fact, to our tradition of growth management here in Portland, in the Portland region. Other confirmation has occurred in a number of ways. In June, the Congress for New Urbanism had its national conference here, and despite the rather provincial remarks of one of its founders at the conference, most were quite enthusiastic with Portland and spent most of their conference time actually out on the streets, not in the building here, walking around and really seeing firsthand what Portland was like. And I think we have many true believers out there now around the country. My own strollings around town since I have arrived have confirmed for me that Portland is, in fact, in many ways as close to an Eden as any other place in the country. And certainly I've found that we have a mayor who is completely dedicated to the community, as is the rest of the city council. Mayor has a huge heart, a real commitment to the community, and I think a real abiding interest in leaving a legacy of careful city building and community development that will last for generations into the future. And we're lucky, in fact, to have a number, all the city council members actually, who are committed in their own ways to aspects of city building and improving the community. The Planning Commission, since I've arrived, has really demonstrated to me that they're really thrilled to be thinking about bigger picture questions again. And I'm blessed by having inherited a very capable staff to help me carry things out. So all of that being said, why would the city reshuffle the planning functions in the city and go search for a new planning director? It all sounds pretty good if we just keep doing what we're doing. I think, however, if we take a closer look at our Eden, there are a number of cracks in the surface, a number of challenges that serve as a wake-up call and are asking us to take stock of new trends, new conditions in a way that will allow us to resurrect our traditions, the traditions we hold most dear. Let me just give you a few of those. With the economic growth and diversity that I mentioned, which I think has been unparalleled in the last 100 years in Portland, this has come at some expense to the urban form, to the urban growth boundary even. Portland is in many ways not attracting the jobs that the suburban jurisdictions are. Most of the growth in the late 80s through the 90s has occurred in Hillsborough, Tigard, and other areas, Wilsonville, at at the edge. And that's fine. Those communities deserve jobs and need jobs. The trend, however, is that Portland could become the hole in the donut, serving as the housing function for the new technology jobs that are created in a ring around the city. More serious than that, I think, however, is the fact that many of the best new technology jobs are not being filled by Portlanders. They, in fact, are being filled by people coming in from outside and relocating to the region. And that is good in a way, too. It brings in new energy, interesting, intelligent people. But we do run the risk of having a kind of two-class system here. Those who are from Portland holding a certain kind of job, and those who are coming into the region having the best jobs. Another critical aspect of this is that I'm not certain that we have the academic infrastructure here to support the new economy. We certainly have wonderful institutions here which are stretching to grow, but the linkages are not there from the Portland population to the public school system, and from the public school system into higher education system, into applied research that will really support these new institutions. So in many ways, the training is happening elsewhere in the country and not locally. And finally, the affordability of housing is being, pressure is being applied to the affordability of housing by the new economic growth. If we look back just 10 or 12 years to the adoption of the Albina Plan, in fact, the central objective in the Albina Plan for the inner Northeast neighborhoods was to gentrify, was to stem the tide of disinvestment that was occurring there, and to have reinvest with people with higher incomes. Most recently, in some of the hearings over the interstate urban renewal area, the primary issue we heard was we need help stemming gentrification because, in fact, we can't afford to live here anymore. Things have become so successful that now we're priced out of Northeast Portland. Another sort of crack in the facade, I think, comes in perhaps most visibly in the form of the dreaded row house, and the fact that the 2040 plan has translated for many, many people around Portland as new, ugly infill development that's not desirable in their neighborhood. And this may have been the genesis of the City Club report, which was my sort of first reading assignment when I came on the job, the density report. And in fact, that's probably amplified by the fact that much of this growth is occurring in new areas of the city, areas which have been annexed to the city relatively recently. Most of the land divisions are occurring, for example, in outer southeast Portland, which brings up kind of another couple of issues. One is that outer southeast may be one of the few affordable areas left. In fact, school-age population is declining in Portland relative to the suburban jurisdictions, and that's a trend that we need to look at very carefully, providing family housing and in continuing to ensure the livability of inner neighborhoods in the city. But not only that, it sort of begs the question, are we really one city or are we two? And you won't be able to see this, but I have a map at a small scale up here, which I'll wave at you and be happy to show anybody, which kind of graphically demonstrate. These are results from the Measure 7 election. And what's interesting about this little map is that basically every precinct east of 82nd Avenue voted for the measure, either by a slight margin or in some cases overwhelmingly. And every precinct west of that line and south of Columbia Boulevard, I believe, voted against the measure, and in many cases in the central parts of Portland by a very large margin. And that's one indication that we really have not quite put our arms around our entire community post-annexation. I think that perhaps one of the coldest wake-up calls or slaps in the face has been coming from the federal agencies, which strike right at the heart of our tradition about caring for the environment. Two things there. We have now 3 species of fish who are listed on the endangered species list that come through the Portland area, through the Willamette River and into the tributaries. And the Superfund site in Portland Harbor, we are now either now or just about to be designated a Superfund site, not something you wear with honor. And I think those things are real wake-up calls. They go right at our traditions. I have also found that although viewed from the outside, Portland seems to be one sort of well-oiled machine doing the public good, that in fact we are in the city a collection of many bureaus under different city commissioners. We have a lot of different diffuse programs going on, and the sense in the community is that we're not very well coordinated at all. And I hear this in many, many corners of the city as I go talk to various neighborhood groups and business groups and other interest groups. Another trend is that despite the economic growth here, we are still not a capital-rich region, and in fact, many of the ownerships of the largest Portland companies no longer reside in Portland. This is a fundamental shift from 20 or 30 years ago, when the owners of most companies, in fact, lived here and felt a strong and civic attachment to Portland. That's no longer the case, and that's true in many, many areas of the country. But now headquarters here of Portland companies could be in Kansas City or Atlanta or anywhere else. And finally, Measure 7. How can I not mention that one? Not something I had planned on in taking this job. Truly surprising to me, having watched from afar the Oregon elections over the last 20 years and watching gradually the margins of a defeat for such land use restrictive measures on land use capacity getting wider and wider. This one kind of snuck up on us, and its implications are not completely understood, but it certainly hangs a dark cloud over the future of planning here. So, now that I've given you the depressing news, let me say a few things, point a few rays of hope at the situation. First of all, let me just describe my charge in coming here as I understood it from the mayor and the city council. It was, in fact, to take these challenges I've just laid out in front of you and convert them to opportunities, and to really resurrect the notion of comprehensive planning as an activity by which we all constructively engage in wrestling with our future, these difficult issues, and turning them into real advantages, ways in which we can restore the Portland tradition. My approach here is to really focus on the issues, get everybody that we can, leaders within the city and outside partners in the community, to focus on the issues, define them in a way that allows us to do something, and to essentially kind of turn the crank, as one planning commissioner put it to me recently, getting some energy and momentum going on solving these longer term questions that are in front of us. The council also asked me to, in the process of doing that, rebuild the trust with the community. I think the City Club density report was probably not only instrumental in my arrival here, but signaled to many city decision makers that the city needs to really rebuild the faith with all aspects of the community. And finally, they passed a resolution explicitly asking me to serve as a coordinator amongst the city bureaus that have anything to do with long-range planning or development, and in that small way to help the council reinvent the way the city does its daily business. Now let me talk a little bit more about my approach in terms of what I would recommend substantively the city move in. Let me talk about 3 general goals, and then I'll talk about some specific initiatives, and then leave time for questions. three sort of large areas that I would suggest are the areas that we ought to focus on to ensure the kind of Portland future that we all want and deserve. First of all is to tackle the issue of these environmental concerns. And I think the constructive way to look at much of this is to really spend some time defining a green armature, if you will, that would include the river, the streams, hilltops, parks, tree-lined boulevards as an integrated system. And make that part of our green infrastructure, if you will, as readable as our street network in the city. It is a part of our framework, a part of what we need to take into account as we do our city building. It is a place for nature. It's a place to escape to. It's a place for recreation. And it defines the edges and the connections between our neighborhoods. The second area, and I'll come back to some specifics in that in a moment, the second area I think we need to pay attention to is the urban form. I went through an exercise with my staff and a few of you in the audience here, by which we examined the 2040 numbers. When I first arrived in the end of January, I think 2 weeks later in February, the City Council had a public hearing over the proposed land division code, and it was extremely acrimonious. Citizens came out and said they didn't want anything to do with this document. The council should flatly reject it because all it meant was density. And despite staff protests that it was density neutral, which in fact technically it is still the way in which people perceived new developments and infill. And in fact, I think that our aspirations for the future are not adequately captured by the kind of planning we've been doing, which is sort of taking a large district of the city and rotating around the city, taking 20 years or more to do that, really focusing on land use maps and zoning codes. I think we need to increasingly think through a design lens at our urban form, and to use the skills and thinking that's involved in urban design to really think about what makes quality neighborhoods and what makes a wonderful central city. The exercise that we went through numerically was to look at the 2040 plan and find that, in fact, without any further upzonings or changes in our comp plan, we actually have the capacity to meet even the most optimistic population growth trends that would occur by 2040. We sort of straight-lined out every projection that we could lay our hands on, which were fairly aggressive because they were based for the most part on the last 5 years or so of 10 years of rapid growth. We have the room to do that and still reflect the community patterns that we know and love. It's really an issue of design. And that design should allow us to also look at what makes up a neighborhood and how can we build neighborhoods in such a way that the uses complement one another, that families want to stay, that people feel proud about. And the third area I think that we need to engage in has to do with understanding the longer-term economic trends in the city and in the region as a whole. And at Metro, we've been engaged recently in some discussions there that are beginning to ask those bigger questions about where we're going. And I think that's been a very fruitful exercise in doing that. And I think in Portland, we need to really understand and acknowledge that the longer-term economic trends, the role of education in that, as I mentioned before, because regardless of what we do in these other areas, if we aren't paying attention to shaping real economic development, we won't succeed. So let me tell you about a few specific objectives here. First is within the sort of green, and actually where these get interesting, I think, is in the overlaps between these areas. The mayor has recently launched a project called the River Renaissance. And that is an explicit look at the river from city limit to city limit, and in fact, in many ways, looking beyond that to our partners in the watershed upstream. And really taking these mandates, the federal mandates from the ESA, looking at the Superfund designation, and understanding how do we resolve those, and in fact, more than that, how do we make the river work for its many purposes, the potential for many purposes there, including really becoming our front yard again for the city and for the region. The recreational focal point, the gravity center of our park system, for example, and as the armature for exciting new urban development, whether it's housing or commercial or mixed use. That the presence of the river needs to inform what happens in the North Macadam district, in the River district, in the Lloyd district and Rose Quarter planning that's going on now, and there's some exciting work going on there, and for the future of the Central East Side. These are big questions that we're asking. It's a project that's gotten a lot of enthusiasm, and if you haven't stepped into that one, I would recommend that you do so. In fact, there's some little brochures in the table in the back of the room you can get on your way out, and we encourage you to become active in that. There will be a vision produced after the first of the year, probably late January, early February, that will sort of lay out the grand multi-purpose vision there for the River Renaissance and lay out the process from that point forward. In terms of the urban design area, we are recommending that we take a very deliberate, conscious look over the next 18 months or so at the whole of the city in kind of a sketch form, understanding where the growth areas are, where the opportunity areas are, where the city's already planning to make investment, where we're seeing certain trends, and look at it with a collection of urban design people at the opportunities there for infilling and building neighborhoods in the process. This will be very different from the process I described a moment ago, sort of rotating every 5 years or so from one district to another, but to try to grasp quickly where the real opportunities are for implementing the 2040 plan. The perception, as I mentioned a minute ago, is that it's all landing on the single-family neighborhoods, and in fact, much of the growth potential is in multifamily districts, in town centers, main streets, and so forth and so on. And with regard to the longer-term economic questions, I think there we need to do a few things. One is to really form a group to have an active dialogue about where the economy is going. I, for one, believe that the digital economy is here to stay, but probably its greatest efficiencies for business will run their course over the next 5 or 10 years, perhaps. Those have been, the internet, for example, has resulted in about 15 to 20% efficiencies in how companies do business, and that's resulted in real savings and real dollars for the economy. But there are other parts of the economy that can replicate that kind of growth curve, and one of them is signified, in fact, by the presence of Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland. Having come from the Bay Area recently, I have witnessed the biotech revolution occurring there, and Portland does have the potential to become a player in that realm. And in fact, OHSU, as it graduates into the highest ranks of nationally ranked research institutions, which it is doing, has the potential to be the recipient of lots and lots of applied research dollars, and the spin-off potential of that kind of activity is enormous for the private sector and for employment in Portland. And that brings about the other components of this initiative, which are really to look then at our education system and understand whether or not we are actually feeding that kind of economic engine appropriately and can get more of a brain trust here locally and more training happening locally. And finally, I think it informs the city, the port, and other agencies about where our investments ought to be placed. in the future. As agencies, we make enormous capital investments that, if done appropriately, can leverage similar investments in the private sector and by other agencies as well. And I think that we need to take that kind of consolidated look at making investments for future generations. Let me stop there, having drawn the broad outlines, and tell you that I'm thrilled to be in Portland. And one note I would make is that I'm fortunate to have the coaching of three of my predecessors, actually. David Knowles, the former planning director, Bob Stacy, who at the moment's back in Boston, but who I've met with a number of times, and Ernie Bonner, who was the planning director here in the 70s, who in fact may be coming onto the Planning Commission very soon. And I actually recognize in the audience one of the people who got me interested in urban planning in the first place, a high school history teacher, Kim McCall, who's sitting at the front table here, who actually served as an early inspiration for me. So thank you, Kim, and thank you everyone for coming, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I was tempted to ask a question related to the City Club study on density in Portland, but you've obviously studied it so thoroughly already. Earlier this week, Marine Fisheries Service released anywhere that there's other streams that harbor. Can you tell us how this requirement, if it were to be here for the long term, would affect development in Portland? Do you see other ways to address the concerns of the National Marine Fisheries Service?
Yeah, that one actually did come as a bit of a surprise to us this last week, and it would have, I think, fairly dramatic implications about our thinking for the North Macadam district so far. As many of you may know, I've been advocating a wider setback there, something along the lines of a 100-foot setback with incentives to do greater than that. A 200-foot requirement I took in the letter from NIMS to be really kind of a surrogate for achieving three functions that they laid out, including functional in-water habitat, bank treatments, and a sort of a drain field effect to keep pollutants running off of the land from the river. And I think that our approach here is going to be to draw nymphs in, bring them to the table, and try to understand on sort of a scientific basis how we can achieve those functions. I believe that actually in our program under the River Renaissance, one of the activities we'll be doing there is to really map the Willamette River and its functions for fish. It isn't uniform. The river has a meandering quality with different areas for resting and feeding for fish and so forth and so on. And we're taking a very science-based approach there, and we're sort of, NIMS is coming out with this letter, and in fact the North Macadam district planning is about a year ahead of us completing that work. So it's a shot across the bow. It's a proxy for keeping those values. I think in the end we'll be successful in incorporating not only fish functions, but the other functions of the anticipated greenway in North Macadam, which have to do with human recreation. I don't see them as being in complete conflict, and so I think, again, sort of looking through both a scientific and design lens, that we'll be able to craft something for North Macadam that will satisfy NIMS and satisfy the other aspirations for the district.
Hi, Chris Smith, club member and alumnus of the Density Study Committee, but my question is only tangential to that. Since you've used the DNA analogy, I guess that brings up the question of nature versus nurture. And I think we have a situation like that in Northwest Portland right now, where the DNA through neighborhood planning and the planning around the streetcar would all point towards more higher density residential and mixed use development. At the same time, we have the environment in the form of new economic forces that seems to want to plant telecom hotels in that area, which are blank, faceless buildings, at least as they've been developed so far, that really contradict with what the DNA has to say. And I can see both sides as both a neighborhood activist in Northwest and an internet marketer by profession. So I'm not solely on one side of this question, but my question to you is, how do we make sure that that economic development is integrated with the DNA rather than overrunning it?
That's a great question. In fact, we struggled with this at a city council meeting a week or so back. I think under the economic initiative I was describing, we would want to stay abreast of trends like the high fiber optic cable and these what are called telco hotels, where a lot of the switching gear occurs and so forth. Because actually Portland is still, and the downtown Portland, in fact, the phone company building is really still the nerve center of the new information technology. And that's a good thing for Portland in terms of the economics. Where it runs afoul of our other objectives is where we get buildings that are essentially windowless and wall-less, located on the streetcar line, as you referred to. So we're taking kind of a two-pronged approach to that one. One is we're looking at ways to, through the Northwest Plan and through a sort of quick initiative, to get some design and location standards in place that pull those to the upper floors and away from the streetcar, requiring ground floor active use and so forth. But the other prong is to take a proactive approach, which fits into the third area I was describing, which is to really get together with the new communication providers, the telephone companies, and the energy companies. Are huge energy draws. They draw just enormous amounts of electricity. And to try to get a coordinated strategy to get these folks to locate where we want them, rather than being in a reactive mode. There are many districts in town where locating them would be appropriate. Many of them do not need to be right next to the nerve center and are not that sensitive. So we're hoping to do a proactive effort there to address that and not wait, in fact, for the completion of the Northwest Plan. As one council member asked, can't the Planning Bureau be quick and nimble in responding to these new trends? And we're trying to demonstrate that.
Paddy Tillett, club member. When you spoke about urban form, you talked about looking at the city through a design lens, and I took that as a heartening indication that you intend that design shouldn't, as it often is, be the result of regulations already in place, but rather one would go in with a concept of what one wanted to design and then figure out how to implement it. That is the approach that was taken on the River District, which is perhaps one of the greatest successes we've had in recent years. Can you talk a bit more about your thinking along those lines?
Well, I think our zoning code is to some extent informed by design principles, but it is not clear and it's not flexible in the way that you describe. And I, again, would like to be proactive here and get, as part of this design effort, to get a collection of people together, both on staff and in the architectural community, to really begin at the neighborhood scale to define some prototypes that are workable, and then think about how our code either works against those or doesn't serve them because it's inflexible enough, and go through that exercise. With regard to the central city, I think we have an even greater challenge there to really, I would say it's an opportunity to really start to mock up some things that we think would make the central city exciting from a design point of view. One of the little moves we're making in that regard, for example, is looking at the Midtown blocks, where there's a tension between having them be open park blocks and an alternative which would keep them in retail use, essentially. But the aspiration there is to have both a healthy retail district and good quality open spaces in the central city. And I think that kind of tension needs to get resolved through a design exercise. So getting out in front of this rather than reacting to proposals through the lens of the code, to actually get out front. We're planning on doing a week-long charrette around that in February, bringing everybody into one big room essentially and kind of sketching out the future of the park blocks. I would like to see us engaged much more in that kind of upfront activity.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Andrew Wheeler, member. I'm glad to hear what you're saying about the park blocks. I hope it works out because we really, at the same time, we talk about creating a dynamic system of spaces over our freeway, the Stadium Freeway, which is kind of a high-priced idea, and maybe the time hasn't come for that. And there are things like the park blocks with the advent of the Goodman Garage being taken down that seem like where we should concentrate our activity and our effort, really in the center of the hole in the donut. You go down there now and you see for sale signs and few people on the sidewalks, and that's really outrageous, and I don't know if we deserve being the most livable city with that situation at that location. The other place at the center is, okay, the question's coming. But I hadn't heard much about vision. I'd heard a lot of sort of technical stuff, and the other place that's most important to our city is the river. And I think we ought to get it back. And we have an opportunity, and I would love to see the East Bank Freeway go. What are your visions related to those items?
Well, thanks for asking that. Yeah, maybe I did sound technical. I actually think the first thing, I think in my interview process with the mayor, she asked me what my big ideas were, and I said, well, the first on my list would be to reclaim the river as our front yard. I think the river is what unites us together. It's our reason for being. It's our heart and soul. And to me, the opportunity to blend city and nature there is unparalleled. And we have I think the political will and the social infrastructure here to achieve that. And it's really a matter, I think, of drawing out the vision and then harnessing the resources to do it. They won't come from local government general fund. We will need to sort of leverage the activity of everybody who touches the river in whatever way over time to make that happen. But I think it's our playground. I think that it is a place where we can restore natural systems, where we can have events and activities, where we can put new urban neighborhoods right up to them and have it be an exciting place to live. There's no reason in my mind why we can't have new residential condominiums, for example, right downtown on Nato Parkway. We don't have to just do that in the Macadam district or the River district. And you mentioned the east side, and to me the opportunity, probably the biggest opportunity here in terms of the central city in looking at the river, is to understand how we could unite the east and west sides, the east and west banks. And I think, although some would dread it, we need to look again at the question of the East Bank Freeway and whether that should be removed, buried, or even just unhooked from the link. And I think that feasibility needs to be looked at again to understand whether that's serving now really as a local street or as a freeway, and really understand where that traffic could go. In my view, we could have a world-class park there on the East Bank and great civic and cultural institutions adjoining it, and a high-technology district and living right behind it, and really complete the notion of what our central city could be. So those are things I'd like to test out in my tenure here. Thanks.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. How do you think we're going to be able to deal with the growth of the automobile population in the city, which takes so much space away from people and activities and whatnot?
Well, that's a really complex, as you alluded to, a very, very complex situation. I think that we are committed to sort of holding down parking ratios in the city, but still allowing enough of the automobile traffic to make developments marketable. There's a tension there to keep the retail economy downtown healthy and so forth. Over the long term, I think the more housing we build in and near downtown, the more pedestrian it will become, the less cars we'll need to accommodate. I think the streetcar is a great signal of a future system that within the central city can circulate people very efficiently. And I'd like to see that extended as well. There are other small moves we can make in terms of the design of intersections and bikeways and so forth to promote non-automobile usage, but there's no one magic bullet there. I think it's going to continue to be one of those areas where we have to just press on a lot of different fronts. Yes?
I've been reading a lot about a tram that is proposed by Oregon Health Sciences that would connect the Oregon Health Sciences too, facilities they're planning in the macadam district there. Wouldn't this terribly impact the neighborhoods it goes through and the views, which are old neighborhoods, the type you want to keep? And then also, who's paying for it? Is that OHSU, or is it city money, or what?
Well, you're asking questions that I'm not sure anyone knows the answer to just yet. There has been a proposal floated by OHSU to construct a tram, the purpose of which would be to accommodate some of their future growth in the North Macadam district. That results from knowledge that they can't build everything they need to build on the hill. And I do think keeping OHSU, as I mentioned before, as a key player in town is important. How people get to and from the hill, I think, needs some study. One of the proposals to evaluate in the Markham Hill planning process that we're just now initiating would be the tram. I'm not sure anybody has a real clear idea about what it looks like or how frequently it moves or what the options for aligning it are and so forth. There's been some initial look at that. Frankly, we haven't had the full discussion yet with either OHSU or with the community about what the options are there. There may come a time when there's a hard choice in front of the city that's the critical linchpin, and we just need to say yes or no. But I think we're not at that stage yet. I think we need to sort of look at that and have a public dialogue around the options there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gil, I'm Ted Falk, and I chair the density report that you refer to as your required reading. And I suppose if our report made it more difficult for you to meet the expectations that were created when you arrived, I suppose I should apologize. But this is maybe payback time. What would you like the City Club to do to make your life better in the future? What?
Just all go away and don't bother me anymore. How's that sound? Actually, I think that as the mayor and I hone some of these initiatives, I think it would be great to come back and talk in some detail about them and to engage your membership in helping us deliver on these and helping craft them. I think would probably be the principal area I would see to keep this a dialogue. It may be that you want me to come back once a year, or maybe there can be times when we come back more frequently and really get into some depth here. So I would see that as the principal way. Okay, and a question from the audience. This comes from Erwin Mandel. He asked, how do you think the National Marine Fisheries requirements for river setbacks might affect plans to build out Centennial Mills for use by the Portland Police Bureau's Mounted Patrol Unit? Well, I don't know. We may have to put the horses in a bunk bed system out there. I'm not sure. One thing we did already is to in the mayor's office, we sort of negotiated one day about how far we could move that horse barn back, and we did manage to move it off the shoreline and keep it back 100 feet. And so far, in many other planning efforts around town, private developments and longer-term plans, people have been responding to that kind of 100-foot benchmark that we put out there. So we accomplished quite a bit. Again, whether the National Marine Fisheries Service, sort of the latest major player in the land use equation, will hold to a 200-foot is a little bit premature. If it becomes an absolute, that probably would be an unworkable situation there. Plain and simple. Hi, Steve.
Yep. The success at 2040 depends on making sure that urban centers work effectively. How do you see, kind of as a uniting vision, the implementation of that idea in Multnomah Village, or in terms of 65th and Foster, or in terms of Hollywood, or in terms of Killingsworth and Vancouver? How do you see that coming together so that we, in essence, can again capture the imagination of Portlanders for implementation of those ideas?
Well, thanks, Steve. I think that principally through this urban design initiative, I think that's the way to engage neighborhoods. Citizens, regardless of their walk of life, relate to visual images. They're very powerful ways of communicating desires, and tweaking those, changing those, adapting those are one very quick way to sort of get a handle on what people's aspirations are for their community. And I think, as we found out in the Hollywood and Sandy plan, one area we just did recently, in fact, have just received a national APA award for that, essentially got at the notion that having an intense, dense district actually may be a benefit to that community. But rather than sort of approach it through numbers, we really approached it through concepts and with the help of a local architect through designs. And people actually ended up feeling very comfortable with the concept. And then we backed the numbers out of the concept, and it turned out the numbers were very aligned with what the 2040 plan would say. I think it's a very different approach than coming in, as I think the Planning Bureau did some time ago in Southwest Portland, saying, these density numbers are coming your way, like it or leave it. I think it's a very, very different approach. So we need to look strategically at where we think growth can be accommodated and where it might be accepted, and then engage in a real activity with the neighborhood district coalitions, whatever, that are there to sort of mock up that future. I would add one other concept to that, which is I think that we ought to marry those efforts with real capital planning on the part of the city. We ought to be spending our planning dollars where we are spending our infrastructure dollars. In Hollywood Sandy, the tragedy there is that we don't really have a nickel to implement those ideas yet. It's not in an urban renewal district. It's not slated for major transportation improvements. We have some money that we may be able to use for a park acquisition, but we're not sure about the park maintenance. And so I think that getting the other bureaus to come out with a planning bureau and really kind of do that up front capital planning work is the other missing ingredient here. Okay.
Please join me in thanking Gil for engaging us. Civic group therapy is always a good thing on a Friday afternoon. We are adjourned.